Tonight, you wake not as yourself, but as someone else entirely. A Tang Dynasty tea master, to be exact, rising early in a modest tea house on the outskirts of Luoyang, capital of culture and commerce, during one of history's most poetic eras. The air is crisp with early spring, and outside, roosters are already clucking like they've got somewhere important to be. You stretch under your thin silk blanket, blinking into the dim light filtering through paper windows. A faint scent of dried leaves and warm embers lingers in the air. This is your world now. You sit up slowly, joints a little stiff from yesterday's long hours of grinding tea leaves by hand. The floorboards creak beneath your feet as you stand, and for a moment, you forget where you are, or rather when you are. That's right, you're not just sipping tea tonight, you are the tea master. And trust me, if you think making a decent cuppa is easy, you probably won't survive this morning's ritual without burning the batch, offending a monk, or accidentally insulting the emperor himself through some obscure leaf arrangement mistake. So, if you're enjoying the journey so far, I'd love it if you could take a quick moment to like and subscribe. It helps others find these kinds of gentle stories too. Drop a comment while you're here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love knowing who's drifting off with me around the world. Now, let the room grow dark around you. Adjust your pillows, sink a little deeper, and let the past rise up to meet you. Not as a spectator, but as the main character. The story begins. Now. The sun isn't fully up yet, but the city is stirring. Somewhere nearby, a street vendor is setting up his cart, muttering about the cold and the price of rice. In your tea house, the hearth has been left to smolder overnight, and you kneel beside it now, blowing gently to coax the flames back to life. Smoke curls lazily into the air, carrying the earthy scent of wood and ash. This is how every day begins, with fire, patience, and a promise of something warm to come. Your hands move instinctively, brushing dust from the shelves where neatly wrapped bundles of tea rest in small clay jars. Each one holds a different story. A mountain mist captured in green buds. A summer storm pressed into blackened leaves. You run your fingers over them, feeling the weight of tradition behind each packet. Today will be a long day. Customers will come seeking clarity, comfort, even escape. They'll expect nothing less than perfection. You reach for a small iron kettle, its handle worn smooth from years of use. Filling it with water from a clay jug, you set it over the rekindled fire. As it begins to heat, you glance toward the front door. Today, someone special might walk in, or maybe no one at all. Either way, the tea must be ready. Historians still argue whether tea was first brewed for medicinal purposes or spiritual enlightenment. But here, in this quiet room, it doesn't matter. What matters is the rhythm of the morning, the way the steam rises like whispered prayers, and the knowledge that for the next few hours, the world will pause long enough to sip. The kettle hasn't begun to sing yet, but already the tea house feels more alive. Outside, the city is waking up in layers. First the soft shuffle of monks on morning rounds, then the sharper clatter of wooden wheels over stone streets as traders begin their deliveries. A breeze slips through a crack in the shutters, carrying with it the scent of plum blossoms and something faintly smoky from a nearby bakery. Inside, you move with quiet purpose, pulling aside heavy woolen curtains that kept the cold at bay through the night. The room brightens slowly, painted beams catching the golden edge of dawn. Dust motes swirl in the light like tiny dancers celebrating the start of another day. You breathe it in, the mingling of scents, aged wood, fresh air, and the ever-present whisper of tea leaves waiting to be awakened. You glance toward the hearth. The water has just begun to tremble, small ripples forming across its surface like messages from unseen spirits. This isn't just any water. It's been drawn from a stone well just outside the back gate, filtered through layers of sand and charcoal before being stored overnight in a clay jar. Tang Dynasty tea masters believed water had a soul, and you've learned to treat it with respect. Too hot, and it would scald the leaves. Too cold, and it wouldn't coax out the tea's secrets. You reach for a small clay jar, its surface cool beneath your fingertips. The lid lifts with a soft sigh, releasing the faintest whisper of fragrance. Earthy, green, and just a little floral. This is no ordinary tea. It's a carefully curated blend passed down through generations, each batch infused with the wisdom of those who came before you. Your fingers dip in, brushing over the curled leaves like a jeweler inspecting rubies. Some are dark and twisted like storm clouds, others delicate and feather light, as if they might float away at the slightest breeze. Each one tells a story of mist-covered mountains, of careful hands plucking only the finest buds at dawn, of long journeys by mule and boat to bring these treasures to Luoyang's bustling markets. You scoop a measured amount into your palm, feeling their texture between your fingers. Some are crisp, others supple, all holding secrets waiting to be unlocked with water and time. You transfer them to a porcelain mortar, reaching for a wooden pestle worn smooth from years of use. With slow, deliberate strokes, you begin to grind the leaves, watching as fine dust rises like morning mist. This isn't just preparation, it's ritual. The Tang Dynasty believed tea was more than a drink. It was an art form, a meditation, a bridge between worlds. And like any great artist, you understand that the tools you use shape the final masterpiece. Take the whisk, for instance. Carved from a single piece of bamboo, its tines so finely split they resemble the fronds of a fern. It wasn't mass-produced in some distant workshop. It is crafted by hand, likely by an elderly artisan who spent decades perfecting his technique. He would have selected only the strongest stalks, boiled them to soften the fibers, then painstakingly sliced each strand with a sharp knife until they were thin enough to dance across the surface of the tea. Even the bowl has history. Celadon glaze gives it that pale jade sheen, but it's not just about beauty. The color was chosen because it enhances the golden green hue of the finished brew. Emperors favored this style, believing it reflected the harmony of nature itself. Some even claimed the right shade could reveal poisoned tea, though thankfully you don't expect any assassins today. As you set the whisk aside, you glance toward the kettle. The water has cooled slightly, settling into that perfect temperature where it's ready to embrace the tea without scalding it. You lift the pot again, feeling its weight shift as you pour. And now comes the moment of truth. The water meets the leaves with a soft hiss, like a secret whispered between old friends. Steam rises in delicate spirals, carrying with it the first true scent of the morning. Fresh, slightly grassy, with a hint of something deeper, like rain-soaked earth after a summer storm. You watch as the tea begins its transformation, the leaves unfurling slowly, as if stretching after a long sleep. You reach for another jar, this one smaller, its lid sealed with a thin layer of wax to keep out moisture and time itself. Breaking the seal, you lift the lid and breathe in deeply. This is no ordinary batch. Today, you're working with some of the finest varieties known to the Tang court, each one prized not just for flavor, but for the stories they carry. First, there's Luoyang melon seed, a name that sounds more like a riddle than a tea. Its leaves are broad and flat, shaped oddly like melon seeds, hence the name. Grown in the mist-laden hills of Anhui province, this tea has a smooth, mellow character with a faint sweetness that lingers on the tongue. It was said to be a favorite among scholars who needed clarity during long nights of study, though whether it sharpened their minds or simply gave them an excuse to avoid writing poetry remains a mystery. Next comes Luoyang, a delicate green tea from Jiangsu, so fine that even handling it feels like touching butterfly wings. The name means spring snail, thanks to the way the leaves curl into tiny spirals when dried. Legend has it that this tea was discovered by accident when a young girl, picking leaves in early spring, found her basket filling too quickly and tucked the excess into her blouse to keep them fresh. When she returned home, she realized the warmth of her body had begun to release the tea's fragrance, a discovery that would eventually earn it a place in imperial favor. And then there's Longjing, Dragon Well, perhaps the most famous of all Chinese green teas. Smooth, nutty, with a whisper of chestnut sweetness, it was rumored that the Qianlong emperor himself once visited the village where it was grown and declared the 4 original tea bushes royal property. Whether that's true or just a clever marketing ploy by generations of tea sellers, we may never know. You crumble a small pinch of each between your fingers, feeling their texture, judging their readiness. Each variety tells a different story, carries a different energy. Some are bold, others shy, waiting for just the right moment to reveal their full depth. Historians still argue whether these teas were originally cultivated for medicinal purposes or simply for pleasure. But here, in the quiet hush of your tea house, it hardly matters. What matters is the way the steam curls around your face, the way the scent settles into your lungs like a familiar song. You stir gently, watching as the infusion deepens. The color shifts, pale jade at first, then a richer green, like sunlight filtering through bamboo leaves. Outside, the city hums with life beyond your door. But in here, time moves differently. The tea is breathing now, the leaves opening like petals in warm water, releasing their secrets slowly, deliberately. The scent has deepened, grown more complex, a blend of earth and air, something both grounding and uplifting. But you know better than to rush ahead. This is where precision matters most. You lift the kettle again, tilting it slightly to feel the weight of the water. It's still warm, but not hot enough. Not yet. You press the back of your hand near the spout, feeling the faintest whisper of heat against your skin. Too much longer over the fire, and it'll scald the leaves, stripping them of their delicate flavors and leaving behind only bitterness. That's a mistake even seasoned tea masters make, especially on mornings when impatience creeps in with the sunrise. So you wait. Instead of rushing, you let your mind wander through the centuries, tracing the journey this simple act has taken. In the Tang Dynasty, water wasn't just a necessity for tea, it was part of the ritual itself. Some believed that mountain spring water, drawn at dawn, carried the energy of the heavens. Others swore by well water aged in clay jars, claiming it softened overnight into something purer, gentler on the leaves. And then there were the eccentric scholars who insisted that snowmelt made the finest infusion. They'd send servants up the hills outside Luoyang with silk-lined baskets to collect fresh flakes, which they'd store in sealed urns until summer, when the contrast between the icy water and the steaming tea would supposedly create a perfect harmony of opposites. You chuckle quietly to yourself. Modern debates about filtered versus spring water don't seem so different after all. Back in the moment, you return your focus to the hearth. The flames have settled into a steady glow, no longer leaping hungrily, but burning with quiet purpose. You nudge the kettle a little closer, just enough to coax the temperature upward without pushing it past the threshold. A few minutes pass. You stir the tea once, gently, watching as the color continues to deepen. The surface ripples softly, catching the morning light like liquid jade. Outside, the city stirs louder now. The clatter of hooves on stone, the distant laughter of children, the rhythmic pounding of a blacksmith shaping iron into form. But here, in your tea house, time moves differently. You reach for a small bamboo ladle, dipping it carefully into the kettle. A thin stream of water flows into a porcelain cup beside you, and you bring it to your lips. Just a sip, not to drink, but to test. The warmth spreads across your tongue, clean and mineral-rich, carrying the faintest trace of wood smoke from last night's embers. Perfect. Now comes the final step before serving, pouring with care, ensuring the tea remains balanced, never rushed. You position the celadon bowl beneath the spout, letting gravity do the work. The tea flows smoothly, catching the light as it falls. Quirky fact: did you know some Tang Dynasty tea masters used to measure water temperature by listening? They claim they could tell the exact degree based on how loudly the bubbles popped. Whether that's true or just another poetic exaggeration, you've learned to trust your senses, touch, sight, smell, all working together in harmony. As the bowl fills, you set the kettle aside and take a breath. The first cup is ready. You lift the celadon bowl with both hands, feeling its warmth seep into your palms. The tea inside is a perfect shade of jade, not too pale, not too dark, just right for this morning's first guest. You take a moment to admire it, watching how the light catches on its surface like ripples in a forest stream. The door creaks slightly as a breeze slips through the gap, carrying with it the scent of plum blossoms and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Outside, Luoyang hums with life, but in here, everything feels still, sacred. This is more than just a cup of tea. It's a promise of calm, of clarity, of something ancient made fresh again with every pour. You step toward the low wooden table near the back of the room, where a cushion waits beside a small lacquered tray. This is where the ceremony will unfold. Quiet, deliberate, unhurried. With careful hands, you set the bowl down, then turn to gather the final touches. A shallow dish of candied ginger, a tiny spoon carved from pear wood, and a strip of silk embroidered with swirling clouds. Tea in the Tang Dynasty was never served plain. It was an experience meant to engage all the senses. Some added salt for balance, others a whisper of chrysanthemum petals for floral depth. But today, you've chosen simplicity, just the tea, the warmth, and the hush that settles between sips. As you kneel before the table, you remember the words of an old master who once said, A good cup of tea is like a good conversation. It should leave you wanting more, yet perfectly satisfied. Whether he meant it as wisdom or just a clever way to get people to come back for another round, you can't be sure. You reach for the bamboo whisk, dipping it gently into the bowl. A few slow strokes, just enough to coax the flavors forward without disturbing the delicate balance you've created. The surface shimmers, catching the morning light like liquid glass. Outside, footsteps grow closer. Soft, hesitant at first, then more confident. Someone is coming. Historians still argue whether the earliest tea ceremonies were meant for meditation, diplomacy, or simply passing time during long winters. But here, in this moment, the answer feels simple. Tea was made for moments like this, when the world slows down just enough to notice the steam rising from a cup, the way the light shifts across the floorboards, the hush that follows the first sip. You sit back, waiting, and then the door slides open with a soft sigh, and for a moment, the morning light spills across the threshold like liquid gold. A figure steps inside, cloaked in travel-worn robes, shoulders dusted with the fine powder of distant roads. The scent of wind and sun-baked stone follows them in, carried on the hem of their sleeve. You watch as they pull back their hood, revealing a face weathered by time and miles. Sharp cheekbones, eyes that have seen too many horizons to be surprised by anything anymore. Their gaze meets yours, not with urgency, but with the quiet understanding of someone who has spent too many nights under open skies and knows the value of stillness when it finally arrives. Without a word, they cross the room and lower themselves onto the cushion opposite you. It creaks softly beneath their weight, as if recognizing the presence of a traveler who has sat in many tea houses before this one. You nod once, a silent greeting, then reach for the celadon bowl. With both hands, you lift it from the tray, feeling its warmth steady your own. You pass it across the table, watching as they take it with practiced ease, cradling it like something precious. Steam rises between you, curling through the space like an unspoken question. Long road, you ask, voice low, more a murmur than a statement. They hum in agreement, lips pressing briefly to the rim of the bowl before taking the first sip. Their eyes close for a heartbeat, then open again, a little softer now. From Chang'an, they say at last, setting the cup down with care. Through the passes, past the old watchtowers, over the hills where the wind never stops whispering. You lean back slightly, letting the words settle. Chang'an, the imperial capital, a city of poets and politicians, of silk-draped courtesans and whispered conspiracies. You've heard stories about it, of course. Everyone has. But hearing it spoken aloud by someone who's just left its gates makes it feel suddenly real. What brings you here? You ask, already reaching for the kettle. Another pour is coming. Slow, deliberate. They exhale, long and low, as if shedding the weight of the journey all at once. Looking for silence, they admit, and maybe a story or two. A smile tugs at the corner of your mouth. Then you've come to the right place. Quirky fact. Did you know Tang Dynasty poets often traveled with small tea kits strapped to their belts? Some even claimed inspiration only struck after the third cup, though whether that was poetic license or a very clever excuse for drinking all day remains unclear. You refill their bowl without ceremony, watching as they wrap both hands around it, letting the warmth sink into their skin. Outside, the city continues its rhythm. Carts rolling, voices rising, birds flitting between rooftops. But in here, time stretches thin, folding in on itself like layers of ink on parchment. They take another sip, then glance up at you. "Tell me," they say, voice barely above a whisper, "do you ever get tired of listening to people talk all day?" You laugh quietly, shaking your head. Only when they don't mean what they're saying. They nod, satisfied, and lean back against the wall. "Good," they murmur. "Then I'll tell you mine." The poet sets the bowl down with a quiet reverence, as if it were an offering to some unseen muse. He leans back against the wooden wall, exhaling slowly, his breath syncing with the rhythm of the morning. Outside, the city hums softly. Distant footsteps, the occasional bark of a dog, the low murmur of voices carried on the breeze. He closes his eyes for a moment, then opens them again, fixing you with a gaze that feels like it's peering through time itself. "You ever been to Chang'an?" he asks, voice still low, like he's afraid speaking too loudly might break the spell between us. You shake your head. "Only in stories." A slow smile spreads across his face. "Then let me tell you one." He shifts slightly, stretching out his legs, rolling his shoulders like a man preparing to set off on another journey. Not with feet this time, but with words. "Last spring," he begins, "just before the plum blossoms started falling, I was walking through the West Market when I saw something strange." You lean in just slightly, not enough to interrupt the flow, but enough to show you're listening. "There was a girl," he continues, barefoot, standing atop a silk merchant's crate, reciting poetry to a crowd of fishmongers and spice sellers. She couldn't have been more than 13, maybe younger. Her robes were patched, her hair tangled from the wind, but her voice... He pauses, shaking his head. Her voice could have made mountains weep. You raise an eyebrow. "She must have been good." "She was better than good," he says, taking another sip of tea. "She spoke like the sky had taught her how to sing, and the people, they stopped what they were doing, just stood there, mouths open, hands full of fish or cumin or whatever they'd been haggling over, and listened." Quirky fact. Did you know that during the Tang Dynasty, street performances were common in marketplaces? Poetry wasn't just for scholars and courtiers, it belonged to everyone. Some emperors even encouraged impromptu recitals, believing that poetry kept the soul light and the mind sharp. The poet chuckles softly. I asked one of the fishmongers later why he was listening so intently. You know what he said? You shake your head. He said, "When someone speaks truth, even if they're just a child, you stop and hear it." You glance at him, surprised. That sounds suspiciously wise for a man who sells carp. He grins. Tell him that next time I see him. He sets the bowl aside and stretches again, fingers brushing the edge of the table. Anyway, after she finished, the crowd clapped, tossed a few coins into her outstretched sleeve, and went back to their business. But I followed her. You raise an eyebrow. You didn't try to recruit her for the imperial court or something. Oh, I tried, he says, rubbing the back of his neck. But she vanished before I could catch up, slipped through the alleys like mist through bamboo. Historians still argue whether many of the great poets of the Tang era learned their craft in palaces or on the streets. Some say Li Bai himself once performed in the markets before becoming famous. Others claim he only wished he had. The poet leans forward slightly. You ever wonder, he murmurs, how many geniuses slip through our fingers, because we don't recognize them when they speak. You think about that for a moment, watching the steam curl from his bowl. Outside, a bird lands on the windowsill, tilting its head toward us, as if waiting for the next line. The poet leans back again, fingers drumming lightly against the wooden floor, as if keeping time with a song only he can hear. The tea has cooled slightly, but he doesn't seem to mind. He's more interested in the rhythm of the conversation now than the warmth of the cup. Outside, the city continues its slow awakening. A street sweeper drags his broom across the stone path just beyond your door. The soft shh of bristles against rock blending with the occasional chirp of sparrows perched on the eaves. Somewhere down the lane, a vendor calls out his wares, something about fresh lotus roots and spiced persimmons. But the words blur into the background like distant waves lapping at a shore. You glance at the poet, waiting for him to continue. He notices your gaze and chuckles softly, shaking his head. "I suppose you're wondering why I'm telling you all this," he says. You shrug. "I assumed it had a point." He nods, then reaches into the folds of his robe, pulling out a small silk pouch. With careful hands, he opens it and tips a few dried petals into his palm. Chrysanthemum, delicate and pale gold. "Would you mind?" he asks, holding them up. You shake your head. "Go ahead." He drops them into his bowl, watching as they sink slowly, unfurling like tiny blossoms blooming underwater. He stirs once, gently, then lifts the cup to his lips. "You know," he murmurs after a long sip, "tea isn't just about taste. It's about timing, about knowing when to speak, when to listen, when to let things steep." You nod slowly. "Sounds like poetry." He grins. "It is. Or maybe poetry is just another kind of tea." He sets the bowl aside and stretches again, rolling his shoulders. "Anyway, before I lose my train of thought completely, the girl wasn't the only thing happening that day." You raise an eyebrow. "There was more?" "There's always more," he says with a smirk. "That same afternoon, right after she disappeared, I ran into a monk who claimed he could predict the future using nothing but tea leaves and a broken comb." You laugh quietly. "Of course he did." "No, really," he insists. "He sat me down in front of a low table, poured a fresh cup, and told me to drink it quickly." You tilt your head. "Why quickly?" "He said the longer the leaves settled, the less clear the message would be. Something about fate being slippery if you wait too long to read it." Quirky fact. Did you know some Tang Dynasty fortune tellers actually use tea leaves for divination? They believed the way the leaves arranged themselves at the bottom of the cup could reveal everything from love fortunes to political conspiracies, though skeptics argued it mostly revealed how much water someone had drunk that morning. The poet takes another sip, then sighs. "Anyway, I drank it, fast, and when I handed the bowl back, he studied it for a long time, brow furrowed like he'd just discovered something unpleasant." You lean forward slightly. "What did he say?" The poet smiles faintly. "He told me I'd meet someone today who would change the course of my journey, someone unexpected." He glances at you over the rim of his cup. "Funny, isn't it?" You blink at the poet's words, not quite sure if he's teasing you or if fate really has decided to play its hand today. He sets his bowl down with deliberate care, as if anchoring himself to this moment, then leans forward slightly. "But I didn't realize it at the time," he continues, voice still low, like he's afraid speaking too loudly might scatter the memory into the air. "Because right after that, things got strange. You raise an eyebrow. Stranger than a fortune-telling monk and a girl reciting poetry in a fish market. He chuckles. Maybe not stranger, just more Tang Dynasty. Outside, the city hums along. Footsteps, voices, the occasional clang of metal on metal from a nearby workshop. But inside your tea house, time feels suspended again, stretched thin between sips and stories. The poet exhales slowly, eyes drifting toward the window where sunlight spills across the wooden floor in golden stripes. After I left the monk, he says, I wandered through the East Market, trying to shake off the feeling that I'd just been told something important without actually knowing what it was. You nod. That happens a lot with monks, doesn't it? He grins, more often than you'd think. He reaches for his bowl again, swirling the tea gently before taking another sip. The chrysanthemum petals have softened now, their edges curling like tiny waves on the surface. I passed by a paper seller's stall, he goes on, and noticed a crowd gathered around a man dressed in robes so bright they practically glowed in the sun. He wasn't selling anything, just standing there, holding up a scroll like it contained the secrets of the universe. You lean back slightly. Let me guess, another poet? Oh no, he says, shaking his head. Worse, a bureaucrat. You groan, because even in a different time and place, some things never change. This one was giving a public lecture, he continues, on timekeeping. You stare at him. Seriously? Seriously? He nods. He was explaining how the imperial court keeps track of time using water clocks, sundials, and bells that ring at precise intervals throughout the day. You glance toward the small incense stick burning near the edge of the table. It's about halfway gone. A rough estimate, but enough to know the morning is slipping away like steam from a cooling cup. Quirky fact. Did you know the Tang Dynasty had one of the most advanced timekeeping systems in the world at the time? Court astronomers developed intricate clepsydra, water clocks, that could measure time down to the minute. Some were even designed to compensate for temperature changes, because apparently, even water needed help staying consistent in winter. The poet smirks. This guy was going on about how important it was for everyone to live by these official times. Said that if people kept their own schedules, society would fall apart. You laugh softly. So he was basically telling a bunch of merchants and street performers that they needed to start waking up when the emperor said so. Exactly. He gestures with one hand. And the best part, nobody was even arguing with him. They were just listening, nodding like it made perfect sense. Historians still argue whether strict timekeeping in the Tang Dynasty was really about efficiency, control, or just making sure everyone showed up for court ceremonies on time. The poet shakes his head, setting his bowl aside again. Anyway, I eventually walked away before I started believing any of it, but I couldn't stop thinking about how much we let time dictate our lives, even while we don't realize it. He looks at you then, eyes steady. Funny thing is, I still don't know if the monk was talking about you or the girl, or just the whole ridiculousness of that day. He pauses, then adds with a smirk, but I do know one thing. You tilt your head. What's that? He leans back again, stretching out his legs. That tea always seems to be there when something important happens. The poet leans back, arms resting on his knees, fingers idly tracing patterns in the wooden floor. The tea between us has cooled again, but neither of us seems in any rush to refill our bowls. Outside, the city hums along, a steady rhythm of footsteps, voices, and the occasional clatter of cartwheels over stone. He watches the steam curl from his cup, like it might reveal something important if he stares long enough. "You know," he says after a moment, "people always talk about how tea tastes different depending on where you are, who you're with, what kind of mood you're in." You nod slowly. That sounds suspiciously wise for someone who's been drinking all morning. He grins. It's true though. It's not just about the leaves or the water. It's everything around it. The air, the light, the stories you tell while you drink it. He lifts the bowl again, takes a slow sip, then sets it down with care. "I once met a woman in Chengdu who claimed she could brew tea that tasted like memories," he continues. "She said every cup carried something from the past, a feeling, a place, a moment you thought you'd forgotten." You raise an eyebrow. "Did it work?" He shrugs. "Depends who you ask. I drank hers and suddenly remembered what my grandmother's garden smelled like when the plum trees were in bloom. My friend swore he tasted the sea." Quirky fact. Did you know some Tang Dynasty tea masters experimented with flavor layering? They would store tea leaves alongside dried flowers, citrus peels, or even bits of cinnamon bark to subtly infuse them with scent before brewing. Some believed these added flavors could influence dreams, moods, or even luck. You glance at your own cup, watching as the surface ripples slightly from the faintest breeze slipping through the window. "What did you add today?" the poet asks, voice still low. You shake your head. "Nothing unusual. Just a bit of salt, a pinch of chrysanthemum." He nods approvingly. "Simple is best sometimes." He reaches into his robe again, pulling out a small cloth pouch. With careful hands, he opens it and tips a few dried petals onto his palm, osmanthus, golden and fragrant. "May I?" he asks. You gesture toward his bowl. "Be my guest." He drops them in, watching as they sink slowly, releasing a soft floral note that blends with the existing warmth of the tea. "There's an old saying," he murmurs. "That tea should be like a good poem. Complex enough to keep you interested, but simple enough to remember." You take a sip, letting the flavors settle on your tongue. "And do you agree?" you ask. He smiles faintly. "Only when it's brewed right." Outside, a bird flutters past the window, wings catching the sunlight for just a heartbeat before vanishing again. Inside, the silence between us feels comfortable now. Not empty, but full. Like the space between verses in a song you know by heart. The scent of osmanthus lingers in the air. Sweet, floral, with just a whisper of citrus. It mingles with the fading warmth of the tea, wrapping around you like a silk shawl on a spring evening. Outside, the city continues its rhythm. Footsteps, voices, the occasional clink of metal against stone. But in here, time feels again like something you can hold. You glance at the poet across from you. His eyes are half closed, lashes casting soft shadows over his cheekbones as he breathes in deeply. He looks like someone who's been carrying stories for too long and is finally setting them down, if only for a moment. He stirs slightly, then shifts his weight, stretching his arms above his head before letting them fall back to his sides. "I think I could fall asleep right here," he murmurs, voice barely more than a sigh. You smile faintly. "That wouldn't be the first time someone dozed off in this tea house." He chuckles, then exhales slowly. "It's peaceful here, like the world forgot to rush past your door." You nod, glancing toward the window where shafts of golden light spill across the floorboards. A breeze slips through the crack in the shutters, carrying with it the distant scent of jasmine and something faintly smoky. Perhaps a nearby incense shop, or the remnants of last night's offerings at a temple. Quirky fact: did you know some Tang Dynasty doctors prescribe tea not just for refreshment, but for relaxation and sleep? They believed certain blends could calm the mind and ease the body into restful slumber. Though whether they were right, or just tired of people asking for cures to insomnia, remains up for debate. You lean forward slightly, resting your elbows on your knees as you watch the steam curl from your bowl. The tea has cooled further now, but it still holds its character. Earthy, smooth, with a lingering sweetness that refuses to fade completely. You ever wonder, the poet begins after a pause, voice still low, what it would be like to live forever in moments like this? You tilt your head. You mean sitting around drinking tea instead of doing actual work? He laughs softly. Exactly that. He lifts his bowl again, taking another slow sip before setting it aside with care. There's something about places like this, he continues. Places where time slows down. Where people don't talk too loudly, don't move too fast. Where the only thing pressing is the next cup. Outside, a bird lands lightly on the windowsill, tilting its head toward us as if considering whether to join the conversation. It chirps once, then flutters away, leaving only silence in its wake. Inside, the quiet settles deeper, folding around us like an old blanket pulled from storage. Familiar, comforting, worn in just the right ways. The tea house feels heavier now, not with weight, but with warmth. The sun has climbed higher in the sky, casting longer shadows across the wooden floor, and the air carries that hazy stillness that settles over midday like a slow exhale. Outside, the city hums on, but here, time stretches thin again, folding in on itself like ink bleeding into parchment. You glance at your bowl, nearly empty now, just a few lingering drops catching the light like forgotten secrets. Across from you, the poet leans back against the wall, one arm draped lazily over his knee, eyes half-lidded as if caught between wakefulness and dream. He stirs slightly, then lifts his chin toward the window. Evening's coming, he murmurs. You follow his gaze. The golden light is shifting, softening. No longer the sharp clarity of morning, but something gentler, deeper. The kind of light that makes everything feel like it's wrapped in silk. You nod slowly. Means it's time for something darker. He raises an eyebrow. Oh? You push yourself up onto your knees, moving with careful grace as you reach for the kettle. The water inside has cooled enough to need a gentle reheat, so you nudge the coals beneath it with a slender iron rod, coaxing the fire back to life with practiced ease. As the embers glow brighter, you turn your attention to the shelves where your jars rest in neat rows. Your fingers pass over familiar labels: green teas for mornings, floral blends for afternoons, before settling on one that feels heavier than the rest. This one holds poor, aged, fermented, deep like memory itself. Some say this tea improves with time, growing richer, more complex the longer it's stored. Others claim it can tell you the history of every hand that's touched it. You crack open the lid, letting the scent rise, earthy, woody, with just a whisper of smoke. It's the kind of aroma that lingers in the lungs long after you've breathed it in. Quirky fact: did you know some Tang Dynasty traders age their pu'er in caves, or buried it underground to enhance its flavor. They believed the tea absorbed the energy of the earth itself, turning it into something almost mystical. Whether that was true or just poetic exaggeration, nobody could ever prove, but plenty were willing to believe. You scoop a measured amount into your palm, watching how the dark leaves catch the fading light. Then, with steady hands, you pour. The water hits them like rain on dry soil, releasing a slow curl of steam that smells like distant forests and old stories waiting to be told. You set the bowl down between you and the poet, sliding it across the lacquered tray with quiet finality. "For winding down," you murmur. He studies the cup for a moment, then lifts it with both hands, cradling it like something sacred. He takes a slow sip, lets it settle on his tongue, then exhales through his nose like he's tasting the very air around him. "This," he says after a beat, voice low and thoughtful, "feels like the end of a good day." The poet sets his bowl down with quiet reverence, as if it were a vessel holding more than just tea, more like the weight of the day itself, steeped into something warm and grounding. The last rays of sunlight slip through the window in golden ribbons, catching on the dust motes that swirl lazily between you, like tiny stars drifting through an unseen sky. Outside, the city is winding down too. The sharp clatter of morning trade has softened into murmured conversations and the occasional call of a vendor closing shop for the night. A breeze slips through the crack in the shutters, carrying with it the scent of jasmine blooming somewhere nearby, mingled with the faintest trace of wood smoke from a distant hearth. You glance toward the shelves where your tools rest in neat rows. The bamboo whisk still holds the ghost of foam on its tines. The celadon bowls bear the fading warmth of past cups. You reach for them one by one, fingers brushing over smooth porcelain, worn lacquer, carved wood, each object holding a story of its own. With slow, deliberate hands, you begin to clean them. First, the bowls. You rinse them gently with water drawn from a clay jug kept cool in the shade. Then the whisk, dipped lightly and shaken until the tines are free of any lingering foam. Each movement is practiced, almost meditative, like a final ritual before the world fully drifts into sleep. Quirky fact: did you know some Tang Dynasty tea masters believed their utensils carried the spirit of every cup they'd ever held? Some even whispered thanks to their whisks at the end of the day, just to be polite. You set the clean tools aside, then turn your attention to the jars lining the shelf. With careful fingers, you seal each one, locking away the scents of green leaves, aged pu'er, and dried petals. The air shifts slightly as you move, the mingling aroma softening, settling into the wooden beams like memories pressed into the grave. Across from you, the poet watches in silence, arms resting loosely on his knees. He looks more relaxed now, shoulders no longer tense from the road, eyes less guarded than when he first walked through your door. He clears his throat softly. "You do this every night?" he asks. You nod without looking up. "Every night," he hums thoughtfully, watching as you return each tool to its proper place. "It's peaceful," he murmurs, like everything slows down just enough to notice it. You glance at him then, lips curving in the faintest smile. That's the point. Outside, a bird calls once, then falls silent. Inside, the only sound is the soft You watch the steam curl from your final cup, slower now, lazier, as if even the air doesn't feel the need to rush anymore. You take a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through your chest, grounding you in this moment. Historians still argue whether Tang Dynasty tea masters brewed their final cups with intention, as a way to reflect on the day, to honor the guests who had come and gone, or simply because they weren't quite ready to let go of the ritual yet. Tonight, you suspect it's all three. You glance toward the door, then reach for a small strip of silk embroidered with swirling clouds, a makeshift cloth used to wipe the table one last time before closing shop. With careful hands, you smooth it over the lacquered surface, watching how it catches the dim light, like water rippling beneath moonlight. Quirky fact: did you know some tea houses in Luoyang left a single cup out overnight, filled with cold tea and a flower petal? It was said to be an offering to the spirits of rest and reflection, though others claimed it was just an excuse to avoid washing dishes in the morning. You smile faintly at the thought, then set the cloth aside and stretch your arms above your head. Your muscles ache slightly from the long hours of kneeling, standing, pouring. But it's a good kind of ache, the kind that comes from doing something meaningful with your hands. Across from you, the poet shifts slightly, rolling his shoulders before opening his eyes. He blinks slowly, then exhales like he's surfacing from a particularly pleasant dream. "I think I'll stay a little longer," he murmurs, voice soft as the wind outside. You nod once, understanding. Some nights aren't meant to end quickly. Instead of speaking, you lift the kettle again, feeling its weight, the faint warmth still trapped inside. Without a word, you pour one more cup. Not for ceremony, not for guests, but simply because tonight deserves it. And as the steam rises between you, slow and steady, you close your eyes and breathe in deeply. Because tonight, in this tea house, in this moment, everything feels exactly as it should. The fire has burned low now, just embers glowing softly in the hearth, like distant stars blinking through a hazy sky. The tea house is quiet, wrapped in the hush of nightfall, where even the wood beams seem to sigh with contentment. Your breath slows, deepens, each inhale drawing in the fading traces of chrysanthemum and aged puer, each exhale releasing the tension of the day, like steam slipping through your fingers. Outside, the city sleeps beneath a velvet sky, lanterns swaying gently in the breeze like sleepy fireflies. Somewhere far off, a flute plays a slow, meandering tune, notes floating through the night air like whispers carried on the wind. Inside, your body feels heavier now, grounded by warmth and time well spent. The tea lingers on your tongue, earthy and sweet, like the last line of a poem you never want to forget. The poet has drifted off beside you, curled slightly against the wall, face relaxed in peaceful slumber. Even the silence between you feels full, not empty, but complete, like the space between dreams. You shift slightly, easing yourself onto the mat beside the hearth, letting the coolness of the floor meet the warmth of your skin. Your eyelids grow heavier with each passing moment, fluttering like moth wings in the dim lantern glow. And as the world beyond the tea house fades into distant echoes, you let yourself sink deeper into stillness, into comfort, into the gentle embrace of sleep. Let the night wrap around you like a warm shawl. Let the stories settle like leaves in still water. Let the past drift away on the breath of tea and time. Sweet dreams.